The hardest part of starting up any RPG is selecting your class for the first time. This is going to definitely be the case in Dragon's Dogma 2, but the Vocation system allows for a lot of flexibility throughout your first or first of many playthroughs of the new RPG coming out later this month. In this video today, I'm going to break down all of the information that we know about the Vocations to help you decide what path you'll be taking when the game goes live on the 22nd. And if you haven't yet, please download the Character Creator online. You can download it on Steam for free to make your character ahead of time so you're good to go when the game does launch. But this is your first time on my channel, the way I do things is by upfronting the knowledge in my video so you can just see if it's the right one for you. So with that being said, if the game is out right now and you're watching this, just shut the video down. This information is all pre-release, and unless it's day one, I just don't want to misinform you. Outside of that, since I can't paraphrase every vocation, what I will tell you is that you can swap your vocation pretty regularly once you reach a certain point in the game. Furthermore, you can get advanced vocations, which are improvements upon the base ones, and hybrid vocations, which blend elements of two vocations together. So if you went into this with some analysis paralysis of which to choose, just go with whatever you want to try out and then swap it later if you so wish. You will level up stats according to what vocation you have, but it was really hard to mess up your character in Dragon's Dogma 1, so don't worry about that here. Play what you want, don't pay attention to what the internet tells you is the best, and enjoy the game. It's 70 fucking bucks, so you deserve to play whatever way makes you happy. That's really the too long didn't watch this entire video, but if there's more you'd like to know or more info, feel free to navigate to the individual chapters for the vocations in the timeline in the description. And if that's all you wanted to know though, please feel free to head on out. Before you do, please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe if this video helped you, as that is a huge or has a huge impact on my channel. If you've not yet picked up Dragon's Dogma 2 for the PC, you can use my link to my Capcom affiliated Nexus Store in the comment and description. This will get you a key directly from the developer, and I get something like 10 or 15% commission, which goes a long way towards supplying my mini Aussies of vicious treat addiction. Let's get started here on which vocation to choose in Dragon's Dogma 2. So to get us started, we're going to talk about the basic vocations first. That's going to be Fighter, Archer, Thief, and Mage. And you're also going to select one of these four vocations for your pawn. Now, your pawn can become an advanced vocation, which we'll talk about later, but initially, they're only relegated to these four, which they can then progress upon. And don't necessarily think that advanced vocations are a pure progression point. Like I say, hey, if I'm going from a fighter to a warrior, it's just a better fighter. It's not necessarily like that. It's a different fighter with different things to take in mind. So I want to just let that kind of be known up front, and also that you will have, like I said before, flexibility to swap into different ones if you see fit, or if you want a specific style of approaching the game that's maybe different. Maybe you didn't know that the Archer has a certain damage profile that you actually wanted from the Thief instead. So we'll talk about those things, but I want to kind of let you know that stuff up front. Let's go into our very first one, and that's going to be Archer. And let me know in the comment section below which vocation you'll be choosing, because I can't decide. But the Archer is going to be your ranged damage dealing class. Now, it's important to know that every single class has some way to mitigate damage. Now, not maybe directly like the fighter can with heavy armor and shields, but mobility is going to be the king of the game here when it comes to damage mitigation for the Archer. They'll be able to jump around and shoot things and jump off of things and shoot them again. And when you think of the Archer, you kind of think of, hey, I'm going to be shooting things with a bow and arrow. And that is 100% what you'll be doing. A lot of single target damage. You do have a limited amount of AoE that is attached to elemental, I don't want to say enchantments, because that's not the kind of approach I've gotten from all of the videos for Archer. It's more like, hey, I've dipped my arrow into this to do this enchantment of damage. And you can have like what looks like a poison damage. You've got like an AoE blasting cold arrow. You've got a fire arrow, and that will detonate once you press another button. And that's how the Archer really uses all these elements, which will of course progress further if you go with Magick Archer, where you'll be able to have like a heat-seeking fire arrow. But essentially, you'll have this high amount of mobility. And the nice thing about the Archer too is the ability to hit weak spots on all creatures at any angle. The fighter will probably struggle with any kind of high weak points on maybe a tall monster. But the Archer has the ability to pinpoint any weak point on any monster, and that is kind of the strength here, right? You also have the ability to kind of shoot flurries of arrows or single arrows at a time that you're not really aiming, or you can charge one or do what is called a dire arrow, where you charge it up and shoot a real big blast. Keep in mind that Dragon's Dogma is a game that relies not necessarily on combos, but it has more of, it's a Capcom game, so it has more of a flow to the combat system that relies on timing and a lot of flourishing through different skills. So you'll be doing that with the archer, and that's going to be up to you as how you do that. So if you want to play a character that can do a lot of really good single target damage, has a lot of really good mobility, but also a lot of really good range and reach, then definitely you're going to want to go with archer. Next up is the fighter, and the fighter is one that's going to be interesting. It's going to be using a weapon and a shield, not necessarily a sword, because you can swap between the weapon you're using with your main hand on your fighter with the skill that corresponds to it. With a lot of the videos and such that we've seen from IGN or from Capcom directly, we've seen the fighter swap out its weapon, maybe from a mace to a khopesh in the middle of its actual combat. So it's going to be down to how you approach the weapon selection and the skills you're going to approach with the fighter that kind of dictates the kind of damage types or what you'll be doing. Or are you going to use a weapon that does more AoE attacks, whatever it is. But they still do have quite a bit of mobility with their blink strike, which will allow them to essentially charge forward, versus when we take a look at the Mystic Spearhand, which will be able to teleport from location to location essentially. But with the fighter, we're going to have a shield, and that shield is going to be the bastion, right? You're going to be able to hold the line, defend your pawns, but at the same time, the pawns can jump up on that shield and go and do a high target damage to a weak spot that's something really high up. And you will get abilities as a fighter to reach those higher points, but I think that not as well as maybe a thief or obviously an archer. But I still think too that the fighter is the difference, right? You've got that archer that's going to be able to do all this damage and all these things. These thieves that do all this stuff with the sustained damage and stealing stuff. But the fighter is that bastion that's right there at the front of the line, holding the line. And it progresses differently when you go to the warrior, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I think from what I've seen with the fighter, it looks like a very dynamic, very high speed, which is not typically very, usual when it comes to a fighter type of class, that is going to be able to dish out a pretty substantial amount of damage. Still looks like it's not going to be like any kind of weak character, but it still looks like one that is going to be able to, like I've said before, like now twice, hold the line and be the defensive point for your entire party. So if that's how you want to envision your character, you're definitely going to want to select the fighter. Now on the other end of the melee spectrum, we have the thief. And typically with the thief, we've seen a character that has some abilities that carry over from Dragon's Dogma 1, with the Helm Splitter attack where they shoot up in the air and do a really cool little spinny move, then drop down. They still get this in Dragon's Dogma 2, but allows them to launch maybe a little bit higher in the air so they can get those higher, harder to reach weak points. So we're going to see this on stuff like griffins or really tall ogre demons. There's wights in the game that are going to be huge and floating around, so that's going to be really advantageous. But the thief can also climb up and onto things, and you're going to have a lot of very high speed damage. What I think is going to happen for the thief is it's going to be a very high skill ceiling character where anyone can approach it. But if you're really good and really fast with the combos and trying to put those weapon skills together and really down for that type of, I don't want to say eclectic, but high speed level of gameplay, I think the thief is going to be for you. And the thief has an action skill that is basically quote unquote a passive, more or less, that when you do your base attack, you have a chance to steal an item from something. So you have a chance to kind of get additional loot while playing a thief. And keep in mind too, this doesn't need to be you. You can have your pawns being the one that does that do all these things. And you have a lot of mobility as a thief. And I think that the mobility is different than what it is with the archer. The archer's mobility seems to be more on the horizontal plane of like, okay, I'm going to dive out of the way. I'm going to jump off of something to get some distance. I'm going to create distance. Whereas the thief has a lot of horizontal, but also vertical mobility, be able to jump up and climb onto things and attack their head, put satchel charges on them and blow them up to do a lot of massive damage to weak points. So if you want a lot of damage in melee, thief is going to be for you. But I think that the thief kind of differs from the archer in its damage profile. I think the archer is more of a burst DPS style of damage where, hey, I'm going to do a charge shot and really unload a big blast. Whereas the thief seems like more of a sustained DPS style of character, able to do a lot of damage as long as it stays up close and personal, continuing through its combos and its weapon skills. Our last of the base vocations is the Mage. Now, the Mage isn't your typical kind of, I'm just going to cast elemental spells type of character. This is going to traverse elemental spells as well as kind of like the quote unquote divine types of spells that are going to extend to healing. So healing, putting like protection, even enchanting your companions or your own weapons with fire damage and fire elements, the Mage does all that. But if you've played Dragon's Dogma 1, you're probably familiar with the Tornado ability. It's right here in Dragon's Dogma 2, having a lot of really massive aerial effect spells. And I think that's kind of, if you kind of think about it, as far as from single target damage to AoE damage, I think single target damage, the fighter is all the way on the left. And then it kind of moves into the thief, who has some minor AoE abilities as part of their dual blade action. Then the archer has more AoE, but the mage has tons of AoE. So you're definitely more of a support role with this character, right? You're not going to be up close and personal unless you're going to go into one of the hybrid classes that kind of specializes in that. But the mage is going to pull out a lot of support elements for you or your party. And I think, too, this is going to be one that it's going to depend on what your main character is. Like, I'm debating between fighter or archer. Okay, like, or maybe our mage. Thief looks cool, too. Ah, God, I get stuck in like that like spiral. But if I go with a fighter or an archer, I'm definitely probably going to want a mage as my first primary pawn to help me out. Give me some support. Heal me. Elemental enchantments to my weapons, do a lot of AoE damage so that I can stagger things with my single target archer abilities or slam into things with my blink strike as a fighter. So mage is going to sit there in that middle ground of being, hey, I've got good ranged AoE DPS, and I've got so many acronyms, and I've got a lot of sustained support for the backline. Moving into our advanced vocations, we have vocations now that are taught to you. You don't just know them. They're taught to you by masters throughout the entire game that will, once you build a good rapport of them, they will teach you how to do it, or they'll help give you skill tomes that make you better at specific vocations. And the first two I want to talk about actually share very similar styles of mechanics as far as like their overall approach, but different styles of damage. The first one is Sorcerer, the advanced class up from the Mage. So if the Mage was a support character that also can damage, the Sorcerer is pure on the damage. And the Sorcerer has a lot of really fun mechanics to it. And I didn't talk about this with the Mage, but the way you cast spells from this game is using stamina, not like a mana pool. And that stamina drains as you spend time casting the spell. I guess you could say conjuring it, going through the motions. And you can use abilities like Quick Spell to cast the spell quicker, costing you a whole chunk of stamina up front, or you can use abilities like Levitate, so if you're launched into the air, you can actually levitate around, which will also cost you stamina. And you can essentially use these spells to conjure up real big nukes against the enemy. It takes you time to do it, though, so you actually have to take time to cast a spell. Your character will go through an animation, it'll drain the stamina while you're doing it, and then you'll unleash a big fire spell, a big lightning spell that you can then cast repeatedly, a lot of different elemental types of damage. But the way that you can do this is really fun, because if you have another pawn that is also a mage, or just any kind of spellcaster for that matter, they can actually kind of combo up with you, and it'll reduce the cast time and split the load of the stamina and make it so that you're casting it much faster. So you can cast Meteor, which is probably one of the big ones they showed off during the Sorcerer spotlight video, in which case you drop a heavy fire damage meteor onto the enemy, and you can do it in tandem with another sorcerer or mage that can help you cast that spell. What I think is really cool about this is it's not just the typical kind of mage that is, oh, you know, it's very weak, they're just going to get slapped around, and I got to make sure I'm in the right good place. And yeah, you don't have maybe the most health, but you have a lot of mobility with stuff like Levitate, and you have a lot of ways to kind of get out of combat. And on top of it too, if you drain stamina, your character will be in a state where they are kind of stunned, I guess you could say. It takes another pawn to come up to you and like slap you on the back and get you going again. But I think what you're going to find with this character is there's a lot of setup to it. You're going to have to put yourself in a position where you can cast the spell, then let it go off, but it will take you time to do that. So you kind of have to risk and reward it, right? Like, hey, I'm gonna put myself in this situation, I'm gonna cast this spell here, but if I'm in a precarious spot, I won't be able to cast a spell because I'll get knocked and it'll interrupt the spell or whatever. So it's going to be very much a high damage dealing class, but you're going to have to deal with navigating the game mechanics in the world in a better way, I guess you could say, or in a better fashion. And to take that same style of doing damage and putting it into the melee section, we have the warrior, who is a step in a different direction from the fighter. So the fighter uses their shield to mitigate damage. The warrior uses their ability to parry and wearing super heavy armor to mitigate damage. They lose their ability to put up a shield and guard, but they now have the ability to barge into things and knock them over with their shoulder, stun them, and do all sorts of other stat effects to them, as well as then charging up their two-handed weapon to unleash a ton of damage. They've remarked that the warrior does the most damage of all of the classes if it can get its damage off. And that's kind of the trade-off here, right? You have these big, huge charge attacks that you're doing, and if they miss, you just missed a whole big opportunity of damage. In Dragon's Dogma 1, the warrior was not an amazing class, and they've changed that here in the second one to make it so that you have these big, huge, massive attacks that can actually jump vertical, jump onto the heads of things, all sorts of stuff, but you just have to make sure you can actually land those attacks. So I think there's a little bit of like a 4D chess game going on with the warrior that I really like, right? It's not just face tanking things and slamming your sword into it. It's face taking it, but also making sure that you know the attack patterns of the thing you're attacking to make sure you get the big hits off in the right windows in which you can do them. And I think that's a lot of fun strategy to a melee character than not just simply just spamming a button to see what kind of damage you can deal. I like that quite a bit. And one thing I've not mentioned so far in the video is that every single class can grab. So you can grab things and throw things, like, hey, if it's a small little goblin, and chuck that guy off a hill if you want. Or if you want, you can grab onto something and try and rope around it. Whatever it is, different classes have different kind of ways they can play with that, or vocations for this matter. Like a thief can climb when they do it and stuff like that. But just to kind of know that every class has some way they can kind of climb or get onto something's head and do a lot of damage to a particularly good weak point. So if you want to wear heavy armor and do a ton of damage, then you are definitely going to want to play a warrior. So with the basic vocations and the advanced vocations, all of which are available to you and your pawn, we now have the 4 hybrid vocations, and those are only available to you, the Arisen. So the first one we're going to talk about here is going to be a really interesting one in the Trickster. The Trickster is a very non-conventional class. It's not going to be doing any real direct damage. It does tons of indirect damage. And what I mean by that is you don't actually run around and hit things and do damage to them. You have this sensor. Sensor like, you know, if you go to a Catholic church, not like, oh, I was censored, but a sensor that will divvy out all these special abilities. Like it helps dissipate this smoke around you that'll allow you to create a duplicate of your character. And this duplicate of your character kind of works like minor illusion from Baldur's Gate or any D&D for that matter, where the enemy will see that minor illusion and go to jump towards it and they'll kind of follow it. It's almost like indirect tanking too at the same time. So what you can actually do is you can run over to a ledge, create an illusion, and they can jump at that illusion and maybe even jump off the edge. Or you can create false ground underneath them and they can seriously jump onto that false ground and just plummet to their doom. So their damage, like I said, is not directly in the face. They can outright kill something if they can trick it into falling for any of its little traps. And furthermore, too, they have a really cool ability to summon up this shield, like a big old fog wall that enemies cannot see through, but you can see, like a one-way mirror. They have all these very fun, very crowd control characteristic style of abilities that is entirely unique. I've never seen a class that kind of operates like this in, well, maybe a little MMOs like this, you know, like a Mesmer or something. But a lot of their abilities too are fear focused too. They can summon a big, huge, misty spectral dragon that can go and make a whole bunch of enemies afraid, or they can use their ability to kind of like astrally project and scout out areas ahead. And then through that astral projection, they can actually summon their little smoky avatar to distract enemies. So you have a lot of ways to kind of manipulate the game outside of outright doing, you know, elemental damage or attacking things with swords and whatnot. So if you want to be more of a crowd control style of character, but also be a support character, Trickster is going to be for you, because the Trickster doesn't just simply kind of obfuscate. It also will buff up the party. They can use a buff that will increase the damage of everyone around them. They have a series of other support abilities that can allow them to kind of really just do more than simply trying to distract things, which I think is going to be crucial, right? The Trickster, I think, will be very fun for you as the main character. I imagine it's going to, very much like the Thief, have a high skill ceiling because it'll probably be very, well, tricky to approach the class and understand how to crack it open and what to really do and how to do things, because you're approaching fights differently, right? You're not just jumping in, throwing fisticuffs or blowing stuff up with meteors. You're seeing how you can trick the enemy into jumping off of a ledge. And through all the stuff that we've seen through IGN or some of the other previews out there, this stuff still works in the middle of combat, right? It's not like, oh, okay, combat started, now I can't do all my trickster stuff. I can still do it in the midst of combat and even buff up my friends. So I think this is going to be one that's going to be really fun for you, but it'll be very interesting to see how you can really go to town with this, right? Because remember, your pawn cannot be a trickster since it is a hybrid vocation. The next hybrid vocation on that note is the Magick Archer. And the Magick Archer was very strong in Dragon's Dogma 1. But in Dragon's Dogma 2, it's a little more limited in that you can't do all these crazy things that you could in the first one. But that doesn't mean it's a weak class. In fact, it's still very, very strong. You're going to take all the elements of the Archer's capability to shoot things at range, but now you're going to add in a lot of really crazy magical effects. And you're going to be able to do fire damage, you're going to do frost damage, you're going to do this. It's like light damage, I guess you could say, like radiant type of damage. And you have a lot of support capabilities as a Magick Archer too, being able to resurrect your pawns or any of your downed teammates around you, which is going to be, I think, absolutely crucial. So if you want to be the character that's in the back line, letting your pawns do all of the big heavy hitting, the Magick Archer can kind of sit back and do the resurrecting or kind of support everyone around them. But the Magick Archer too is different than the typical archer in that, yeah, the archer could add some element to their damage, but the Magick Archer can pinpoint the specific weak points on all of the creatures it's attacking. And that's a really great ability, right? Sure, the archer can do that from range, but you can either shoot one direct shot, or you can split your shots to a bunch of enemies around, or you can split your shots to all of the weak points that you can target. You have this really cool targeting system with the Magick Archer, and then you can take that basic shot and imbue it with any of the elements that you've put your points into, your skill focus points, or skill. That's not a term in this game. Skill focus points is not a thing. But you can put and invest points into the relative skills to make your basic shot turn from its basic shot into now the fire element or into an ice element, and have a lot of different effects that you can bring to the table. And I think that that's going to be pretty crucial here with the Magick Archer, is delivering a lot of different types of elements to the party while also being able to support them and resurrect them when they're in tight spots. So if that's the character you're looking for, kind of like a backline commander that has a little bit more control over things and can kind of see what's going on in a quote unquote big picture type of way, Magick Archer is going to definitely be for you. So in Dragon's Dogma 1, we had the Mystic Knight. And in Dragon's Dogma 2, that is replaced with the Mystic Spearhand. And we don't necessarily know quite how much tankability the Mystic Spearhand is. I personally don't. I'm sure there are other Capcom creators that have actually played the Mystic Spearhand and had a lot of hands-on experience with it, because they had an event just recently. But this is a class with a lot of really cool capabilities. It basically looks like a Jedi. You can basically force pick up something and throw it at another monster. You can jump over to it. You can blink over to another thing and actually teleport to it. And you have this duo staff, I think is what it's called, duo blade, that allows you to spin around and do a bunch of high energy, high impact attacks. It's a really cool looking class that I think the majority of people that are looking at this game have mentioned that that's what they want to play. And it has some light AoE capabilities in range, or I'm sorry, in melee, being able to spin the staff around and kind of strike around you. So it has a lot of really interesting characteristics in that regard. And it does have some CC attached to it, right? Some crowd control, being able to paralyze things from range or pick up the corpses and launch them at creatures like I just said a second ago. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this will play out and what the survivability is like, because it is supposed to combine the elements of a fighter and a mage. So I want to see how that survivability is. Every single class has some sort of, or vocation has some sort of unique capability, and that kind of goes without saying. But take the fighter, for example. They can block with their shield. The thief can steal things. What's it called? The warrior can parry stuff or barge into them with their shoulder. Like, everyone has like some very specific thing. Or the Magick Archer, for example, has that pinpoint attack that they've got. And I want to see how that works out for the Spearhand, but the Spearhand definitely seems like if you want to be a martial character that blends in a lot of really cool spell casting stuff to augment your martial capabilities, then it's definitely going to be the one for you. This isn't a character that's using their melee capabilities and then all of a sudden dropping like a big huge tornado or a fireball or something like that. They are using that magical capability to move around the battlefield to help augment what they're about to do with their melee attacks. The last vocation I want to talk about is the Warfarer, and this is the most recent one to be actually revealed about the game. And the Warfarer is very interesting because it's going to combine the elements of a lot of vocations. And it's weird to call it a hybrid vocation because it can even combine the elements of other hybrid vocations. If you've watched the action trailer, the character is a Warfarer in that action trailer because they are swapping into different abilities, weapon abilities from a bunch of different vocations. I think in the beginning of it, it shows him use, it opens up with some mage capabilities, and then he uses a Spearhand capability to use the duo blade to then pop into 2 weapons, put a satchel charge on the dragon's head, and then blow it up. That's what a Warfarer does. They jump into the respective vocation to use those abilities, and they morph their stats to match that vocation. I think another example is it shows like using Magic Archer to attack an ogre, then using a 2-handed weapon to parry the ogre's charge, and then use a archer's just basic weapon to jump off of the ogre to then jump into Magic Archer again. So I think Warfare blends a lot of, and I know Warfare blends a lot of the playstyles of all the other vocations. But what I want you to kind of consider with this is they have lower stats when it comes to all of the stats that they can jump into. So maybe, for example, if we're taking just a 1-to-1, if I'm using the 2-handed strike of a warrior on a Warfarer versus the 2-handed strike of a warrior on a warrior, the warrior will have a better stat scale to allow them to do more damage with that attack. The Warfarer will allow me, though, to simply go, okay, well, I'm going to do my 2-handed attack with a 2-handed weapon, and then I'm going to use my archer capability to leap off of something, get some distance, and then use a magic archer ability to shoot at them again, or use a mage capability to do another bit of damage. So the Warfarer will combine a lot of elements, and it kind of leans into that age-old adage, right, of, jack of all trades, master of none, blah, 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 whatever. So if you want to be able to kind of weave into and dance into all these other vocations and be able to try a bunch of things out, Warfare is definitely going to be for you. But like I said before, with that, you're just going to be able to do lesser amounts of damage than the pure class that would just do that ability at a higher damage amount. Doesn't mean you're going to be weak, of course. It just means that since you can do all these things, you're not going to be able to do that one thing as good. But I definitely think it's going to be for people that want to have that experimentation. And I think too, it'll be interesting to see how that damage scales works at the end game, or quote unquote end game. Are they going to be as strong as everyone else because they can have that high variety, or are they just going to end up not hitting as hard because the variety and the lower stat scale doesn't really let them to have the punching power? So I'm going to be interested to see how that pans itself out. Also, too, I think Warfare, like the Trickster, is going to have a high skill ceiling because it's going to require you to really be on point swapping between these vocations. And if someone's seen a hands-on here with the Warfare and they want to share this in the comment section below, it looks like the Warfare is limited to 3 vocation dips, either through the weapon skills or what have you. And I'm pretty sure it's tied to the actual weapon itself and getting those weapon skills. But it looks, again, like the Warfare can be 3 vocations spliced up. So very excited to see how that all works itself out. But at that, it brings our video here to a close. So this covers all the details of the stuff that, well, at least I personally know of all the classes that have been announced. There's only going to be 10 classes in the game. They've confirmed that. So if you have more information, maybe you have a very specific content creator you watch and they've been covering this since announcement all the way through to launch, and you want to say, hey, you know what? My guy over here, he has a lot of really great information. This is what he covered and said. Like Fightin' Cowboy, for example. I brought him up before. He is the guy I always go to for any kind of Soulsborne type of content. He's a Capcom creator, and he's been balls deep in this game. So please jump around, see what other kind of information is out there. There's tons of these videos on YouTube right now that just say, oh, all vocation breakdown, so on and so forth. So go jump into it. Say, hey, well, you know what? What he said about Magic Archer really interested me. We're at a point now where the marketing machine has ramped up and now people have actual, hands-on gameplay of what the Mystic Spearhand is like, or so on and so forth. Go dive into those. Take a look at some of those videos that are out there and get a feel for what class you want to really dive in. And go ahead and let me know below, what class are you going to be playing when Dragon Dogma 2 launches? But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.